The U.S. presidential election looms. What are the constitutional issues at stake? And what issues are consuming faith-based voters? Dr. Matthew Franck of the Witherspoon Institute gives us a closer look. And the International Monetary Fund downgraded its forecast for the U.S. economy. Where should you put your money in a low-growth and low-interest market? Financial expert and founder of the Ave Maria Funds, George Schwartz, weighs in. And finally, he became the longest imprisoned American in North Korea since the Korean War. Kenneth Bae joins me for a harrowing and inspiring story. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Dr. Matthew Franck, George Schwartz, and Kenneth Bae are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. You can find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo. And our prayers and thoughts are with all of those affected by Hurricane Matthew in the Caribbean, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The first and only debate between the vice presidential candidates is in the books. Democrat Virginia Senator Tim Kaine repeatedly challenged Republican Governor Mike Pence during Tuesday's debate. He attempted to tie the Indiana governor to some of Donald Trump's more controversial statements. Pence didn't take the bait. Throughout, he maintained a folksy, soft-spoken, and even presidential demeanor. At points, Pence deflected the Trump attacks and turned them on Kaine's running mate, Hillary Clinton, repeatedly questioning her trustworthiness, raising questions about her use of a private email server, and resurrecting concerns about the Clinton Foundation. Here's a bit of their exchange.
Are respected and respect laws. You can't have somebody at the top who demeans every group that he talks about. And I cannot believe that Governor Pence will defend the insult-driven campaign that Donald Trump has run.
I have to tell you, I was listening to the avalanche of insults coming out of Senator Kaine a minute ago.
These were Donald.
He says,
hold on a second,
It's my
Governor.
time, Senator.
It is, in fact, the governor's time.
I apologize. This is your 2 minutes.
Thanks, I forgive you. If Donald Trump had said all the things that you said he said, in the way you said he said them, he still wouldn't have a fraction of the insults that Hillary Clinton leveled when she said that half of our supporters were a basket of deplorables. She said they were irredeemable. They were not America. I mean, it's extraordinary. And then she laid
Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the debate concerned faith issues, abortion, and the death penalty, which we will share with you later in the program. And Donald Trump wrote a letter to Catholic leaders on Thursday. Identifying himself as pro-life, he vowed to defend religious liberty and school choice. "I have a message for Catholics," he said. "I will be there for you. I will stand with you. I will fight for you. I will defend your religious liberties and the right to fully and freely practice your religion as individuals, business owners, and academic institutions." In his letter, Trump pointed to the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton's pro-abortion record and her support for the HHS mandate. Trump's letter was addressed to the 18th Annual Catholic Leadership Conference being held in Denver this week. And if you blinked, you might have missed it. The crowning achievement of what has been a 25-year battle to curb the effects of man-made warming of the globe was ratified this week. The landmark Paris Agreement on climate change will enter into force on November 4th after a coalition of the world's largest carbon emitters and island nations pushed it past a key threshold on Wednesday. The non-binding agreement requires governments to present plans to reduce emissions with the goal of limiting the global temperature. It can rise by no more than 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. President Barack Obama called the Paris Agreement historic, but concedes it alone won't solve what he called the climate crisis.
Even if we meet every target embodied in the agreement will only get to part of where we need to go. But make no mistake, this agreement will help delay or avoid some of the worst consequences of climate change.
And the United Nations has picked its new leader, and for the first time, he's a socialist. The UN Security Council unanimously chose former Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Guterres, as the next Secretary General. Guterres is well regarded within the vast UN bureaucracy, having served as the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees for more than a decade. Guterres was a prominent Socialist Party leader since the Portuguese Revolution in 1974 until he joined the UN in 2005. By tradition, the Secretary General has rotated among regions. East European nations, including Russia, did argue that they've never had a Secretary General and it was their turn. Others had campaigned to elect the first female UN chief. Guterres takes office in January. And slow economic growth continues here in the U.S. On Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund lowered the country's economic forecast for 2016, projecting only 1.6% growth this year. That is down a full point from 2.6% in 2015. The downgrade is mostly due to a sluggish second quarter in the U.S., according to the latest World Economic Outlook. Growth in personal consumption, which has been driving the American economy, is strong. However, investment spending in business has dropped for 3 consecutive quarters. U.S. economic growth is barely half that of the globe. The IMF projects the world economy to grow at 3.1% in 2016, down from 3.2% last year. More on the state of the U.S. and world economy later in the program. And on Tuesday, Pope Francis fulfilled a promise and visited central Italian towns devastated by the earthquake in August. He again offered his prayers and solidarity to the people of the region. The recovery has been painfully slow. Streets are still strewn with rubble. In Amatrice, the Pope toured a makeshift school set up in containers, where he was greeted by more than 100 young students. The Holy Father also met with firefighters and police and broke bread with the elderly and infirm, many of whom have been displaced by the quake. The August 24th quake killed nearly 300 people and left further 4,000 of them homeless. And the Vatican's chief liturgist, Cardinal Robert Sarah, says silence is needed to restore a sense of the sacred at Mass. Speaking about his new book, The Strength of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise, Sarah told a French reporter that banal noise has replaced prayerful silence in the liturgy under the pretext of making access to God easy. Cardinal Sarah, the prefect for the Congregation for Divine Worship, also renewed his invitation to priests to celebrate Mass facing east, ad orientem. He said that the posture inspires sacred silence in the clergy and the faithful. In July, Sarah made headlines when he first suggested that priests return to the ad orientem posture, sparking a debate at the Vatican and a private meeting with Pope Francis on the matter. According to the Cardinal, he told the Pope that his intention was to be pastoral and to help people, not to spark conflict or set one practice against another. Cardinal Sarah is also calling for an end to the, quote, hateful divisions over liturgy that can occur when a contemplative spirit is missing from the Mass. And the Holy See Press Office has just announced that the 2018 Synod of Bishops will focus on youth, faith, and vocational discernment. According to a Vatican statement, the topic for the 2018 Synod was chosen to express the Church's pastoral concern for the young. Exactly which issues or teachings will be considered by the bishops have yet to be announced. We'll continue to follow this story. And an important American diocese has new leadership. This week, Pope Francis chose Raleigh Bishop Michael Burbidge to lead the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, right next door to Washington, D.C. Burbidge is a native of Pennsylvania. He served as a parish priest, high school and seminary teacher, as well as a former secretary to the late Cardinal Anthony Bevilacqua. Burbidge assumes responsibility of the Arlington Diocese from Bishop Paul Laverty, who is retiring after 17 years. We wish Bishop Laverty a happy retirement and Bishop Burbidge all the best in his new role. And in the waning days of the Obama presidency, First Lady Michelle Obama has ensured that her White House legacy is cemented for years to come, quite literally. On Wednesday, the First Lady dedicated an enlarged and more permanent White House garden. It is the capstone to her Let's Move child obesity program. Mrs. Obama has added steel, stone, and concrete to her garden, all of which would make it more difficult or more expensive for Obama's successor to rip out. Future presidents are under no obligation to keep the garden. White House amenities have come and gone over the years. President Clinton removed the first Bush's horseshoe pit. Clinton added a jogging track and hot tub, which the next Bush removed. You get the idea. The First Lady has secured a $2.5 million donation to help defray the costs of garden upkeep, but the National Park Service will maintain it. So the taxpayer is the real gardener. Finally, I have some sad news to report. You may recall that in late May, I asked you to remember a member of the EWTN family in your prayers. At that time, Joy Martin, the wife of one of our producers, Brian Martin, had been diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer. I am saddened to report that Joy passed away early Tuesday morning. Please pray for the repose of Joy's soul, as well as for her husband and their 7 dear children at this very difficult time. May Joy Martin rest in peace. And when we return, Election Day is just a month away. We'll explore the constitutional and moral issues at stake with political scientist and Princeton University professor, Dr. Matthew Franck. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. There are many important issues at play in this upcoming presidential election. And what issues are Catholics and faith-based voters examining this year? To discuss this and much more, I'm joined by the director of the Simon Center on Religion and the Constitution at the Witherspoon Institute and visiting professor at Princeton University, Dr. Matthew Franck. Matt, thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Raymond.
Great to have you back. Let's talk for a moment about the issues of importance that are not being addressed this political season. There seems to be a lot of talk about this one said that, and the other said that, and I heard him say that. But the issues that the president actually will be responsible for are getting almost no play. What are the ones that are of most concern to you and that you believe faith-based voters, particularly Catholics, should be attentive to?
Well, I think that citizens generally are interested in constitutional issues and the state of our country as a free society. So Catholics are not alone in that. Issues of executive power, for instance, concern everyone, and rightly so. And they're genuine constitutional issues that have been perhaps raised to a sharp point by the Obama administration's record on that score. But I think Catholics in particular, and many of our fellow citizens in the ranks of evangelicals, Mormons, faithful Jews, and Muslims, are concerned deeply about the life issue, the marriage issue, and the religious liberty issue, above all. And they're not getting much play. You're right about that.
Then there's also regulation, which we're hearing almost nothing about, the impact of that. Of course, the HHS mandate, which famously the Little Sisters of the Poor are still subject to.
That's right.
Why do you think those issues aren't being brought up? Is it because jobs and the economy tend to be the big ones for people, and you're experiencing certain economic pain out there?
I think that's a regular pattern. Go back through many recent elections, and you see the same thing, that the pocketbook issues are thing one for most voters, or at least candidates think so. And they structure their campaigns around issues of economic growth, of joblessness, of trade, Mr. Trump has raised the issue of immigration
Yeah.
to a front burner issue for his campaign, along with trade. And these are the things that he's most comfortable talking about, and so they get a lot of play. Foreign policy issues are getting some attention. They've received some attention in both debates, the Iran deal, the Syrian crisis, and so on.
Are you surprised, though, that Donald Trump failed to raise the week that pressure cookers were exploding in New York City and people were being stabbed and knifed in malls, that issue never came up of domestic terrorism and domestic security?
Kind of a missed opportunity for Mr.
It's unbelievable.
Trump. He should be stressing, I think, the national security issue more than he is. Both candidates should be talking about it more than they do. We do have serious problems abroad, but also at home with homegrown terrorism.
I want to share something with you. We had really heard very little of faith. It had not been broached at all during the presidential debates, but during the vice presidential debate, Tim Kaine and Mike Pence had this to say when asked if their faith ever caused them to wrestle with one of their policy positions. Watch.
For me, the hardest struggle in my faith life was the Catholic Church is against the death penalty, and so am I. I looked the voters of Virginia in the eye and said, look, this is my religion. I'm not going to change my religious practice to get one vote.
I would tell you that, for me, the sanctity of life proceeds out of the belief that ancient principle that where God says, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you.
We heard there Tim Kaine and then followed by Mike Pence. I want to start with Senator Kaine. He said there, I'm not going to change my religious practice to get one vote, yet he has swung pretty decisively on this abortion issue. He claims he is personally pro-life.
Right.
He used to support restrictions on abortion. He supported the Hyde Amendment. Where is he today?
I think that Senator Kaine has become a pro-abortion extremist, exactly in the same groove that Hillary Clinton has occupied for years. He now opposes the Hyde Amendment, which he used to support. He now
And the Hyde Amendment forbids federal funding of abortion.
Right, and which let's let people process that. That means that under a Clinton-Kaine administration, the stated policy of that administration would be that the Congress of the United States should spend taxpayer money to fund abortions. That's what the great Henry Hyde, introducing his amendment 40 years ago, stopped. And that policy has continued really with a bipartisan consensus for many years. And the Clinton-Kaine team would shatter that consensus. Now, this is not a man who will not change his view to get a vote. It seems that he's doing exactly that. He cites the example of capital punishment, where he claims that the church helped shape his view on that. He's not exactly letting the church shape his view on abortion.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because we often will come back to Mike Pence. We often hear this. In fact, I see a lot of writing about this, even in Catholic circles, where they almost try to trade one issue for the other. So, you know, I'm opposed to the death penalty, but I support abortion, so I'm okay. Is that illicit way to look at elections and your voting habits?
No, it's really not. And in point of fact, the abortion issue is clearly a non-negotiable, whereas the Catholic Church has yet to say anything unequivocally opposed to the death penalty in all circumstances. It remains a policy issue where some discretion for public authority remains an open question.
Right.
But I think that the abortion issue exemplifies the weakness of this democratic claim to fidelity to church teachings. It borrows in a way, but in a distorted and unjust way, from the late Cardinal Bernardine's seamless garment metaphor. But what they're really doing is unraveling it.
Let's talk for a moment about what we heard from Mike Pence. A lot of pro-lifers, a lot of Catholics looked in on that bit of the debate and were heartened because really for the first time they heard a full-throated defense of these life issues that are dear to many of them and may provide a decisive voting bloc that Donald Trump needs to win this election. What do you make?
Donald Trump does need social conservatives, pro-lifers in particular. His own record on this is mixed at best.
Well, he wasn't a public figure either.
He
was
wasn't
kind of a
that's
freelancing
that's right. That's
businessman.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
but Mike Pence is a pro-lifer of long standing. His credibility, his integrity is pretty unquestioned on this, and he spoke strongly about it in the debate in a very heartening way.
What do you make of this Trump letter that was released today to Catholic leaders saying, "I'm going to fight for you. I'll be pro-life, and I'll defend your religious liberty. I'm with you"?
It's very encouraging, but I have to say that Mr. Trump needs to put letters out like this because he does have some character issues to get over, some integrity and trust issues with voters. And so he's making promises, or rather, the promises are being written for him over his signature. How much he's responsible for them, how much he can be trusted to keep them. Voters have their doubts, and I can't say that they're wrong to have them.
Well, it's in the party platform as well.
It is in the
Hyde
party
Amendment
platform.
and
oh yes, absolutely.
all of this remains there.
Yeah.
Where does this put us as far as you look at the landscape? This is your business. This is what you do every day. First of all, I'll bet you've never, like the rest of us, never seen an election season quite like this or candidates like this. But given that, where do you see the Catholic vote going in this election? It usually is the decisive swing vote.
Right.
Some say the Catholic vote doesn't exist anymore because it moves where everybody else moves. Your thoughts?
My thought is that we have to be careful what we mean by the Catholic vote, because pollsters will identify people as Catholic on the basis of a self-identification that in many cases is a cultural Catholicism of people who were baptized in the church, perhaps went all the way through confirmation, but are not terribly faithful Mass-going Catholics today, or firm adherents to the teachings of the magisterium and the social doctrine of the church. So Catholics split on these things. If the pollsters dig down deeper and are able to distinguish the faithful Mass-goers from the nominal Catholics, you find that the partisan division and the ideological division shows up as well. So the more you go to Mass, the more inclined you are to be a conservative, and the more likely you are to vote Republican. The less you go to Mass, the more inclined you are to be a liberal, and the more inclined you are to vote Democratic. So it is difficult to talk about the Catholic vote. Faithful Catholics, I think, are an important part of the conservative coalition that has supported Republicans for 36 years now. And I think most of them will come home to the party in November. But again, as I said, because Trump is such a chaos candidate in many ways, and comes from a background of political inexperience, but wide public knowledge of who he is, knowledge that in many people's minds actually sows doubts rather than trust. He has some hurdles to get over to bring those voters home to him in November.
What do you make of the church leadership on this? Whenever anybody says, I can't understand why voters are going the way they're going, I often say, wait a minute, what are you blaming them for?
Yeah.
You have to look at a whole trajectory over decades of Catholic teaching and leadership that has shied away from wanting to be too political or to get involved and in the trenches on the issues. Now, we've heard a very few bishops, very few, come out and sort of clearly delineate what church teaching is and what the requirements of a Catholic voter are. We had Archbishop Aquila in Denver this week say, life is the preeminent issue. You must vote on this. You cannot support anyone who supports abortion and is opposed to life, supports euthanasia, all of that. Does that bring any clarity to Catholic voters as they go into the booth, or is it too little too late?
Well, I think more would help. It is late in the day, and many of our bishops are shepherds of the faithful who are loath to speak about politics. They're loath to be seen as political animals, and there's good reason that they don't want to be seen as political animals. But without talking about candidates or parties or legislation, it behooves them, I think, to call on the faithful to conform their actions in the voting booth to the social doctrine of the church, the magisterium of the church, and they should be encouraging their pastors to do this. Frankly, a great many Catholics might have difficulty, even Mass-going Catholics might have difficulty naming their bishop for you,
Right.
telling you who he is. Much less would they perhaps be aware of something he said in a diocesan newspaper or an online publication, they need to hear this from their pastors. At the AMBO on Sundays, and that's tough for pastors. Many pastors find this difficult.
Very good. Professor Matthew Franck, thank you for being here and for your insight. You can find out more about the work of Dr. Franck and the Witherspoon Institute by visiting winst.org. When we return, financial advisor George Schwartz is here to discuss your money in this sluggish economy and how to invest it morally and what the November elections might mean to the markets here and around the world. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right
We see growth as too low, for too long, and benefiting too few. In and of itself, it's not good news, but it's also fertile ground for political dynamics that can depress global growth even more.
That was Christine Lagarde, the managing director at the IMF, forecasting a sluggish global economy. Investing your money in a slow growth economy is always a challenge. How can you get the most return for your investment and ensure that you're investing morally? Joining me is the founder and portfolio manager of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds and Schwartz Investment Counsel, George Schwartz. George, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thanks
Great to be here.
Let's start with this downgrade from the International Monetary Fund. How significant is this, from 1.6 down from 2.6 last year? Should we worry?
I wouldn't worry too much about that. Christine Lagarde runs the IMF, which is a global entity.
Right.
And the Ave Maria Mutual Funds that my firm manages is mostly focused on the U.S. And around the globe, mostly in Europe, things are really in bad shape, partly because of fiscal policy and monetary policy and immigration issues and so forth.
But with this global economy, the U.S. market is so tied and business is so tied to those markets, right?
It is. It is, no doubt about it. And Janet Yellen is to blame in part, too, for maintaining these extremely low interest rates. And the rest of the central bankers around the world have followed suit and gone even further, driving interest rates below zero, which is hard to get your mind around sometimes. Can you imagine taking out a mortgage for $100,000 and then only have to pay back $95,000?
No, it's unbelievable. And Janet Yellen, whom you just mentioned, declined to raise interest rates once again.
Yeah.
It would seem to me, this is a de-incentive for people to save.
Yes,
because you can't make any money putting money in the bank. And it is an incentive to go and spend like a drunken sailor, which seems to be the only thing keeping this American bubble afloat, George.
Yeah, and Janet and the rest of the central bankers around the world have put themselves in a box, and it's hard to get out now. If they raise interest rates, they think that's going to tank the economy of that particular country.
Because the consumer spending will drop.
That's the theory. My view is that the sooner interest rates are allowed to reflect the market conditions, that is, higher interest rates than zero, the better it'll be for everybody. And particularly if it's a quarter-point increase or a half-point increase coming from almost zero, it's not going to be a big deal.
So should people get in the market now or stay out?
As the great Sir John Templeton used to say, any day is a good enough day to buy a good enough mutual fund. And our mutual funds are plenty good. I think they're extremely good. And people with a long time horizon ought to be invested in the stock market with some portion of their money.
How healthy is this stock market in the macro? When you look out, I mean, you've been dealing with this for decades now.
Yes.
As you look across this landscape, it seems to have these wild fluctuations, George.
It does. But after you draw a least square line through them, it always goes up. And the market will keep going up. Maybe not every day, every week, every month, or even every year. But the long-term direction of stock prices in the U.S., and that's our focus, the U.S., is upward. Indeed, in the fourth quarter, there's going to be an uptick in economic activity. The economy has been running at an extremely low rate of growth, 1.5%, 2% for the last 7 years, as a result of Obama's policies in many respects. But the fourth quarter might be up as much as 3% year over year, and that could be the start of something good. But whether it's up 3% or 2.5%, or even stays at 1.5% to 2% the way it's been running, in the long run, productivity will pick up, efficiencies will pick up, and if we get a pro-growth president, who would hopefully be a pro-life president as well, we could get some fiscal stimulation and tax rate cuts. As your friend and mine, Larry Kudlow, says, those lower tax rates could really stimulate the economy and get us back to a 4 or 5% annual growth rate, real GDP growth.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about your George's gems. These are your guidance for picking how to invest your money and picking stocks. What would you recommend? Let's go down the list.
Well, first of all, we want to invest in companies for our Ave Maria mutual funds that are well-established, high-quality companies with extremely strong balance sheets. That's a very important distinction to make. Many companies are over-leveraged, have too much debt on their balance sheets, and don't have staying power, and therefore don't have control of their own destiny. Above all, we want companies that don't violate the moral screens established by our Catholic Advisory Board, particularly abortion and pornography and a few things like that. But in terms of the fundamental investment research that my staff and I do, we want strong balance sheets. We want companies with sustainable competitive advantages, as Warren Buffett would call it, a moat.
Right.
But sustainable competitive advantages with high profit margins and high return on equity, and companies that can control their own destiny to a much greater degree.
A friend of mine who's a great investor always says it's never the what, it's the who. He always looks at the who's running the company, who are the creatives in the mix, and he even travels at times, like Warren Buffett, and I imagine some in your staff do, to the places of point of purchase to see how they're interacting with the public. How important is that, and how does the casual investor get this understanding?
The casual investor isn't going to get that understanding. The casual investor should invest in mutual funds that they believe in, mutual funds that have a good track record like ours, particularly if they're pro-life and pro-family, the way our funds are structured, and then not try to pick individual issues or try to figure out if this company is going to have a good quarter or a bad quarter, or going to beat last year's earnings or not beat last year's earnings.
Have you lost money as a result of the moral code that you insist upon when buying funds or buying stock?
No, that hasn't held us back at all. In fact, one of our Catholic Advisory Board members thinks that our very good investment performance is divinely inspired because we're Catholic and we screen out companies that support abortion. But I tell him and anyone else that it's a result of hard work by my analyst and my staff of portfolio managers. And no, we've had very good investment results. We screen out about 150 companies out of the Russell 3000. So that's only 5% of companies, of the 3,000 largest companies in the country. And my staff and myself have had no trouble finding good investment opportunities for each of our funds.
Some other rules of thumb I want to get through here. Be conservative, know the field, be a contrarian. What does that mean?
Be a contrarian means don't do what everybody else is doing. If everybody else is buying, then prices are too high. If everybody is selling, they've driven the prices down to the point where prices are too low. So you want to buy low and sell high. So you go in the opposite direction of the masses. It's a contrarian approach. And the ideal thing is to find a great company that has a temporary problem and the stock price is unduly depressed. An example would be when Coca-Cola came out with the new Coke many years ago. The stock tanked. A guy named Warren Buffett stepped in on about 200 million shares of stock at the depressed price, and has done very well with it.
And for all the Berkshire investors.
Right.
You also say be patient and check your own backyard. What does that guidance apply to?
That means that there could be companies right in your area, in your state, or in your part of the country that are good investment opportunities. And now this is from a mutual fund manager's perspective.
Right.
I don't advise people to drive down the street looking for companies that they can invest in on their own and try to do their own research. Some people can do that if they have the time or the training or the education, the inclination, the temperament. But I say leave it to the professionals, leave it to us professionals.
Yeah.
I always say I never give myself a haircut either.
So you don't like this idea of these people going online and kind of buying and selling in real time like they're their own broker, essentially.
It's silly. It's gambling, and unfortunately, the discount brokerage firms promote the trading activity,
Right.
and pretend like it's almost a casino, and it's a slap in the face to real capitalists and the real capitalism, which is an integral part of the success of a free market economy.
What is the best breakdown, the ratio of how you should invest your money? A lot of people looking in are frankly scared.
Yeah.
And it's probably sitting in a bank somewhere, just rotting because of the inflation and the taxes and everything else.
And earning almost zero.
All right, yeah, interest rates.
The ratio of stocks to bonds is a largely personal decision depending on your age and your temperament. The old standard trust department formula was 60-40, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. And the older one gets, the more one might put in bonds, because bonds are typically safer than stocks.
Are they still a decent investment, bonds?
Not long maturity bonds. Short maturity bonds have a place, and it's basically as a place to preserve principal.
Short maturity being 5 to 10 years?
I would
or less?
say 4 or 5 years or less. That'd be short maturities. That has less volatility, and you're closer to maturity. But when interest rates go up, which they will at some point, then the long maturity bonds are going to get whacked, really get whacked badly. They can go down 20, 30% in price, and people don't realize that. We've completed a 35-year bull market in bonds. In other words, bond prices have gone up and interest rates have declined for 35 years. That's over.
That's reaching its end.
That's reaching its end, yeah.
So where do you put those monies if you've invested them in bonds all this time?
You could put it in the Ave Maria bond fund.
Oh, of course. Why a bond fund? Wouldn't you put it in an index of S&P 500?
There's nothing wrong with index funds. We don't happen to manage them. They are not screened for the moral screens that we use. So,
what about commodities, gold? Is there a place for that in this economy? Or you're
the only commodity,
not bullish on them?
The only commodity that I endorse is gold, and that is not because I think it's a great investment. I think it's an insurance policy. If everything goes to hell in a handbasket, stocks, bonds, real estate, everything else goes down, depression time, gold is likely to go up, and maybe dramatically. So if you put 2 to 5% of your portfolio in gold and then forget about it, don't hope it goes up, hope it goes down, actually.
Yeah. So, but you're talking about investing in gold stocks or funds, not grabbing chunks of bullion and hiding it under the mattress.
Probably not, no.
Okay.
Gold coins would be one way to invest in gold, or gold ETFs. Exchange-traded funds.
Yeah, explain to people what those are. Those are a little instrument.
ETFs are exchange-traded funds, and there's one called the gold fund, which invests strictly in gold bullion, and you can buy a piece of that like you buy a stock.
Well, how will the tax policies of these two candidates running for president affect your business and the investor's bottom line?
Depending on who gets elected, it'll have some impact. But I would urge your viewers to go back and listen to our friend Larry Kudlow, your friend and my friend Larry Kudlow. He is a great advocate for lowering tax rates, very important rates, lowering tax rates, as JFK did, as Reagan did. And in both cases, it stimulated the economy enormously and grew jobs and grew opportunities and grew the economy, and the stock market did really well. So if we get a pro-life, pro-growth, pro-tax cut rate president, it'll be positive for the economy and positive for our firm and our shareholders.
What scares you the most, looking out at this economic landscape, knowing what you know about patterns and the investments that you oversee and so many oversee like you?
What scares me the most is Hillary Clinton presidency, and which would be, in my view, a continuation of Obama's policies, maybe even on steroids, not even mentioning the Supreme Court damage that she would do.
Worse than the European freefall and the Greece freefall and all the instability in Latin America, Hillary Clinton's presidency is more fearsome to you than that?
Yes, yeah. I'm very concerned about a Hillary Clinton presidency. And, but one has to keep in mind that most of what either candidate will do as president is probably going to be curtailed by the Congress, particularly the Republican House. So they won't be able to do as much damage. Neither one of them will be able to do as much damage or as much good as they think they can. But yes, I'm very concerned about 4 more years of a Obama-type administration. And it's the regulations. The
regulatory burden.
The regulatory burden is awful, especially on small businesses, but big businesses as well. And the government has really had their foot on the neck of capitalism, squeezing corporations, squeezing the profitability of corporations, which hurts jobs, which hurts the economy, it hurts productivity.
Before I let you go, very quickly, we only have a minute. There was a big flap this week about Donald Trump. His taxes were released. They say, look, he hasn't paid taxes in decades. Your reaction to that was what?
I guess I have to take him at his word that he took $1 billion loss one year, which allows him to carry forward the NOL. And that is done all the time. I would have thought it was better if a year ago he had released his tax returns and not hid behind this comment that it's being audited by the IRS and get it over with. But now here doing it 6 weeks before the election is it puts a lot of doubt in people's minds about his credibility or his financial wherewithal.
George Schwartz, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
If you're interested in finding out more about morally responsible investing, you can visit AveMariaFunds.com, or you can give them a call at 866-AVE-MARIA. When we return, my next guest spent nearly 2 years behind bars in North Korea. How he got there and got back is quite a tale. Kenneth Bae shares his story when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest spent 735 days of hard labor in a North Korean prison, and he faced an additional 10 years before he was released in 2014. He was the longest-held U.S. citizen detained in North Korea since the Korean War. I sat down with him earlier to discuss the ordeal and the faith that enabled him to endure. Here's my exclusive interview with Kenneth Bae. Tell me about 2012. You are detained in North Korea. You're running a tourism agency at the time, taking Chinese people, or it's a Chinese tourism agency, into North Korea. Why did they detain you?
I brought Western and Chinese tourists into the country to pray and worship inside North Korea.
Did they know that? Did the government know that?
Well, they didn't know that until I was caught. Then this is when they accused me that I was trying to overthrow the government through prayer and worship. And so I said, you don't believe in God, why do you believe in prayer, power of prayer? But they apparently thought that it was very threatening enough to detain me in North Korea.
Now, they find a hard drive on you,
That's
which
correct.
you regret having. What was on the hard drive, and why was that so suspicious?
I accidentally brought in the hard drive, computer portable hard drive, into the country that contained all my mission support letter as a missionary and photos I took in China and North Korea. Alongside with that, there were footage from Western media documenting, North Korea. So therefore, when they found some of the video clips from the Western media, then they didn't like that.
So, and you are thus far the American held longest by the North Koreans. Why didn't they detain anyone else in your group?
Well, they didn't know what they were getting into when first they detained me. And then, so because the evidence was just for me, and so therefore they let other people go. But others came in as tourists, so they weren't as much a threat as that because I'm the one conducted the tour. I did conducted 18 tours personally, and our company did about 23 different tours together in 1 year.
And in 2013, the North Korean courts accuse you of acts against the Republic, and they condemn you to 15 years hard labor. You thought what at that point?
Well, they told me actually it's going to be either life or death penalty, most likely. So I was actually preparing for the worst. But when they say 15 years hard labor, it was a long time, but I didn't think that I will stay for 15 years. Something will happen for me to go home sooner than that. So I was actually relieved rather than rather than anything else.
And you felt this calling, I mean, for a long time.
Yes.
Initially to go to China,
Yes.
to evangelize in China. You decide to do so in North Korea. Why?
Well, I just simply felt the calling from God because I saw the need of God's grace to be poured into the countries, and then and realized that there's no access to gospel in that whatsoever. When I talk to the guard and they say, "Who is Jesus?" and they said they never heard the name of Jesus before. So I felt that if we go in as Christians to pray and worship in behalf of North Korean, and then God will open the door, tear down the spiritual wall, and blocking from the knowing God. So this is why that I brought people into North Korea to pray and worship and love the people as Christ loved us.
Now, give me a sense of what life was like during this 15-year, well, it started as a 15-year sentence. You weren't there that long. But what was it like every day? They would interrogate you for up to 15 hours a day. The number 15 apparently keeps recurring throughout this story. What was that like?
Well, first few months was just the investigation, and then once I was sent to North Korea prison camp, I have to work from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, 6 days a week, working in the farm, on the bean field, and carrying rock, digging the ground, shoveling the coal into the furnace. So different type of hard labor that I have to endure. It was extremely difficult.
You
tiring.
were in and out of the hospital. You lost a lot of weight.
I lost about 60 pounds during 2 or 3 months of detention in a labor camp. I was sent to hospital for malnutrition. It was very, very difficult, yet God's grace was also sufficient at the time.
And what did you find? I've interviewed so many people who find themselves in your situation, imprisoned unjustly, held. One man I interviewed, Jeremiah Denton, who became a great hero, a senator. This was a man who was interred by the Vietnamese. For 7 years, he was in solitary confinement. He claims he found God there in the quiet, in the loss, in the deprivation of people. What did you discover?
I discovered that God's faithfulness is always the same, yesterday and today and forever, and the same in North Korean prison. He met me, his presence was so thick in the room, almost like I had the presence of God, and the angel was with me at all time. So I never felt really fear. I never felt that I was actually in hopeless situations. I knew that something will happen. Eventually, I'll be going home. But in the meanwhile, God never left me. He said, I cast all your anxieties upon me because I care for you. And he showed me through the very mysterious ways to let me know that he's here with me.
And they allowed you to read the Bible, to meditate, to pray. I mean, they did give you time to do that.
Yes, actually.
Why? Why would they do that?
They wanted to make sure, that when I go out, when I go home, I will tell them my human right has not been violated. One of the things is that they wanted to make sure that because I'm a pastor missionary, having a Bible is important. They say, okay, we'll let you keep the Bible, as long as you keep it to yourself, but they wouldn't let me
talk to anyone else.
To anybody about the Bible or show them the Bible or content of the Bible.
But your captors, some of the guards,
Yes.
were actually quite curious about the gospel, about Jesus, and they had conversations with you. What were those like?
And after about being there for about a year, one by one, God opened the door, and then people start talking, and we start sharing in many different area. And then I ask, if I believe in God like you, then what do I get? What's the benefit? Or some people say, if I believe in God like you, then do I have to pay anything to the church? It's a price. What's the price? And I told them that, I'm in the prison, but price is pretty much you need to give yourself to Jesus. I was there for about 2 years. One guard asked me, you say God is for real, but why are you still here? And I said, maybe God may have different plan. Maybe that plan may include you. Without me, how are you going to hear about God or anything from outside? And he said, I never heard anything like this before in my life. So these are some of the conversation that I had with the guard, and they were saying that is, wait a minute, you are a missionary, you're a pastor, we've never seen someone like you before, because we are the guard and you are the prisoner, but you seems like you're happier than us. Where does your joy, where does your hope come from? And I say, come from God. So we had a few of those kind of moments while I was there for the last 2 years.
Let's talk for a moment about Dennis Rodman, the basketball player who went over there for a number of exhibition games in North Korea. He's a friend of Kim Jong-un's. He mentioned you at one point, tweeted out asking for your release. Then he went on CNN and kind of disparaged you a bit. Your thoughts on him and that whole back and forth. Did it have a role, do you think, in your eventual freedom?
Well, I didn't know, actually, he was, I saw him there and at the exhibition game on
TV. You had TV in your jail.
Yeah, so I saw him singing and playing basketball and sitting next to Kim Jong-un, but I didn't know what has happened until later on. It was actually North Korean government workers came to me and said, what are you going to do about this? Because, now because of Dennis Rodman's rant, and the whole world is talking about you. So, so I had to say, okay, then I will go up in front of the camera and I will do a press conference. And
they wanted you to do a confession.
Yes.
And they claimed you would be freed if you did that confession.
That's what I was asking, let me go after this, and then so I agreed to do so, and then after that, actually, they actually put me back to labor camp from the hospital to pressure more on the U.S. governments for my release. And eventually, I think that because of Dennis Rodman's remark, I think my plight was, was internationally more known, and more people found out about it. And so eventually I came home. So I give him the credit, a little bit of credit for that.
Did the U.S. do enough? Could they have done more?
I believe they have done enough. And I'm there. U.S. State Department contacted our family weekly. Spent about an hour each week to inform and update and everything, and assuring that they're doing everything they can.
So they were monitoring you throughout this time?
Yes. There was a lot of people involved trying to get me home, and especially from this area in Washington, D.C. And I'm deeply grateful for all those people who tried to get me home. And I just met a person who came as envoy recently. She said, for my release itself is actually a miracle itself. It was almost impossible at the time, and God brought me home. Right, 5 days before, exactly 2-year anniversary, Lord woke me up in the morning and told me, open your Bible to Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 20.
That specifically?
Yeah, as I have no idea what that was, and I opened it, and I saw the part of the verse said in the new NIV version, it said, I will bring you home. That was November 3rd, 2014, 2-year anniversary. On Friday, November 7th, U.S. envoy arrived. On 8th, I came home. On the way home, I shared this story with the people who came as envoy, and they were so surprised. They said, we left Washington, D.C. on November 3rd. And so God was reminding me that I'm bringing you home, send the U.S. government plane over to get me home. So how good God is, and He's faithful.
So what now? I know you're now living here in the United States. You're in Dallas.
Yes.
But you keep getting called back to this region.
When I came back, the Lord spoke to me and said, you are not forgotten by people. I have not forgotten you either. And also, I have not forgotten the people of North Korea. And therefore, my heart was aching because I felt like I felt like the shepherd who left the sheep behind. I was so glad to be home. So I was asking the Lord, and what should I do next? And He keeps showing me the compassionate heart for North Korean refugees. There are over 100,000 refugees living without protection in China. And also about 30,000 of them made into South Korea recently. Every year about 1,000 to 2,000 refugees coming in, but they need a lot of help. They don't have anything, they need to start a new life. So I'm moving to actually South Korea to start an NGO and to restore their life, to rebuild the hope that once they had before, so that just creating a community together.
Kenneth Bae, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
we
you.
hope to see you again, and safe travels on all, and good days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Not Forgotten, the true story of my imprisonment in North Korea by Kenneth Bae is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Next week, I'll share with you a few more winners of our Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls, and Mother Angelica audiobook contest. Will Wilder is available from the EWTN catalog at EWTNRC.com and at bookstores everywhere. Some amazing photos and videos to share with you. Well, that's all the time we have for now. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to be here next week. Former RNC Chairman Michael Steele will analyze the second presidential debate, and Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City will discuss the issues Catholics are bound to consider as they vote in November. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.